was there any questions or I guess follow up from the research? We'll try to pull that through.
One thing that I would love perspective on is what does this mean for product marketing? Because a lot of where there's some friction internally is how much time do we spend on selling skills versus product training? And without selling skills, does product training even matter?
Well, and I think what it suggests, right, is we can get product training right, and it's still not going to drive those large purchase decisions without the selling skills. It's almost like the product training is foundational. Like we have to have, obviously, competency. But
marketing buddy, I struggle with this with marketing because marketing is pushing hard. Oh, they're not selling because they don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think something that you said, it can vary by rep, like where that deficiency is. Is it on the product side or is it on the selling side? So I have enablement and RevOps reporting to me, and something I have our enablement team doing now is on a weekly basis. They do this monthly, but on a weekly basis reporting like specifically by rep. Here's the thing that I'm coaching on. Here's the expected outcome, and then here's some examples of like where they're getting it right or wrong. We've been doing it for probably a couple months now, and it seems to be helping. Some of them are product related, and some are sales skill related.
Yep. And I think the best opportunity is where we can integrate those, right? So where the selling skills brings in the product marketing, brings in that information. So it's not a either or an afterthought, but we're saying, oh, well, let's use the product marketing in the role plays and in the case studies, and we're actually using the real products, and now we're tying it together. But let's dive into, in terms of the buying experience, what can we do to coach, and how does that relate to getting out of a slump, or how can that improve, right? So we know that what we said was this idea of headway selling, but get ahead, helping our clients get ahead, can boost win rates significantly, right? 47%. And really those three aspects. So the buyer's evolution, do we know where they're headed, and are we aligned? Are we doing those things to reduce friction? And are we selling in a way that the aligns with the team, with the buyer's initiatives, and we're pulling the team together there? And so when we're stuck, I think it's good to go back to some of these foundational areas and pull those through. So let's talk about what you can do, or what your managers can do as coaches. So this was some research we did with Selling Power Magazine. This actually predates SBI, but I think it's still very, very relevant. And what we did is we looked at organizations and their achievement of quota, and we segmented them then by were they performing at what level, so low, medium, and high. And of those high-performing organizations, what were they doing differently relative to coaching and managing and other aspects? And I think David mentioned this in the earlier session, and he said, I think 23% or something was coaching, which I thought was high. It'd be great if all of our managers were coaching that much. High-performing organizations spent 20% or more of their time coaching, but that was an anomaly. That was actually a lesser percentage. The others were not spending that much time. And you're like, what are they doing? What else are they doing other than coaching? But there was a very strong correlation to those that were coaching more and their achievement of quota. So where 75% or more of their reps were achieving quota, they were spending a high amount of time coaching, and they had a common coaching language. So they were actually, there was training. They knew what, when we talk about coaching, because often we ask managers, are you coaching? And what's the answer? Oh, I coach all the time. Yeah. I tell them what to do, right? I tell them when they're not doing something right. And it's like, well, that may be directing or giving feedback, but it's not really coaching the way we're going to define it. And I think the way that it should be. So having that common framework and a way to do it is important.
So when you say common framework, so our field ride form includes what were the coaching topics going in, what was seen associated with those coaching topics, what was the conversation afterwards? Is that what you mean by framework?
Yeah, and that's a great, a lot of organizations don't have that, and even the fact that they're doing it sets a foundation to say, okay, well then what's coming out of these conversations? And the question is, are they identifying specific skills then, and is there a follow-up to that, or what happens after they complete that coaching visit?
Yeah, we typically prescribe a pretty robust coaching program that includes a lot of different elements and different types of sessions. So they're like the one-on-one coaching versus skill development versus pipeline management. So it's pretty comprehensive in making sure that the interactions are meaningful and direct for that individual, as well as driving pipeline, driving outcomes. So it's pretty robust.
And are you prescriptive on when and how they deploy that, right? So our managers once a month will have a pipeline review and conversation, but it sounds like for you there's 3 or 4 other things. So is it, hey, week 1, we want you to focus on this on your one-on-one?
Yeah, we do a pretty prescriptive cadence. Now,
Yeah.
granted, we have to tailor it. Some clients are like, whoa, that's way too much. But it's actually an investment. So yeah, we recommend pretty high frequency of coaching. I mean, weekly at least.
Yeah, and making it very a conscious decision. So it's not, and it's great. Hallway conversations are wonderful, but that's different, right, than it really sitting down. Or I think David mentioned it in the earlier session, setting time after the call, right? How often are we doing that now? Like it used to be, if you were riding around with the rep in the car, you had windshield time, you had lunch, you had coffee, you're debriefing maybe at the end of the day. Well, now with the virtual meetings, we're on to the next meeting. And if it doesn't get scheduled to say, oh, we are going to debrief, right? We're going to book 30 minutes after this call. Let's talk about what did you like about that call? What might you do differently? What are you going to do coming out of this? Now we have the basis, right, to update our coaching plan and to really lean in on those skills. And, we know if it's not calendared, if it's not a priority, it's likely not going to happen.
What about coaching in the moment versus coaching your first-time leaders to write down the actions that you wanted and come back to it in a one-on-one? Do you have any recommendation there versus coaching immediately after it happens, or just writing it down and coming back to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think coaching as kind of game time, close to game time as possible is important, but you need to have that follow-up. And so that's often it's in the hallway, but then you're on to the next thing, or it's 5 minutes. So we need to either bring that up in our one-on-one or document that, so that I call it groundhog coaching, right? Like, didn't we have this conversation last week and the week before and a month ago? So that's why I think having a cadence where you say, oh, no, we are going to document this. Yeah. It's going to update the coaching plan, or we're going to cover it once a month. Let's go through all of these conversations. The other thing is, at the end of the year, makes your performance review a lot easier because now you have this body of knowledge you can go back to. But these should be dialogues, right? Not like a performance, hey, let me tell you where you're screwing up, but let's talk about how it went. All right, well, let me keep going here. We often see this. I don't know if this resonates with anyone in the room, but coaching is challenging for the frontline managers, especially those who have been promoted from top performing reps. We don't always give them the skills and knowledge they need to be effective. Sometimes it's seen as remedial or punitive, like the only time people get coached is when they're in trouble. We had a client who didn't want us to use the word coaching when we delivered the sales coaching program, which was kind of challenging because coaching had such a bad connotation. That was what happened right before you got fired. And the only time people were put on a coaching plan was basically on their way out. We should see coaching as something everybody aspires to do, right? They want to do. It's helping them get better and create that environment where they're actually looking forward to, oh, this is a good opportunity to talk about, how I can get help or how I can improve. We often see it's not, operationalized. It's not part of a strategy. Coaching isn't effective. There's no trust or transparency, so they don't really trust the manager, or it's only focused on those who are struggling. And, I think that's a challenge versus, again, everybody being part of it. So do you guys run into challenges with your coaches? What do you run into? You're nodding, Karen.
Well, yeah, so we put a ton of time and energy into this. And we also have Gong, so we can really measure or inspect what we expect, is how I like to think about it. And there's a lot more talking than listening, and a lot of focus on specific deals in the pipeline, which is more pipeline, conversations and not necessarily coaching. And I think that's our biggest challenge, is this comfort with, okay, so tell me how it's going with, Joe's Crab Shack. Where are we in the sales process? And there's a belief that that's coaching, but it's not coaching. No matter what we tell them, it's Groundhog's Day.
I think you brought up a couple of important topics, though, that often, even in our one-on-ones, if they end up becoming pipeline reviews or deal discussions, we don't have the time for coaching. And yeah, we want to close those deals, but we should have time to do that, or we should set up a separate pursuit meeting. But we get waylaid, and it's easy to take the bait, and then it's like, oh, let's talk about this. And so we don't really get the chance to do that. And as you said, that it doesn't end up being coaching.
Well, one other thing that that is causing a problem with coaching, some of our managers are also responsible for like different selling motions. So for example, like imagine being responsible for like retention and new sales, and like one of those things alone requires just a lot of hyper focus. And so there's like this swivel chair where not only do they've just got too much going on to be effective coaches.
Yeah, and I think that the frontline managers are a very challenging position, as we know, right? They have a lot on their plate. They're asked to do a lot. Going back to what are their performance expectations? What are those 2 or 3 really important things that we want them to lean in on? And, can we try to narrow the things that we're asking them to do?
And like, how do you manage up to let leadership know?
Yeah.
I love what they said about efficiency doesn't equal productivity. Like we might be saving headcount by having someone responsible for like 7 different things. That doesn't mean that we're getting the results.
Right. Yep.
But do they really care?
No.
Right. I mean, you're going to communicate that up, and they're going to say, well, your budget's the same, so figure it out anyway.
Well, and then we're going to say, well, we're going to fail. Oh, sad. We're not making money because we can't do all these things well.
Yeah.
I mean, but you're right. They won't care, right? They won't.
Yeah. Trying to align that with the sales strategy, with the corporate, it cascades down, and it really says, no, these are the 3 things. But it's a lot easier said than done. So let me keep moving here. When we talk about, all right, if coaching is important, there's some things getting in the way, we want to do it. This is a very simple model, but I think it's one that's helpful to encourage our managers to take, where coaching shouldn't be telling, right? It shouldn't just be being prescriptive, but coaching is about creating this mindset and this culture around asking questions and engaging the individual. So that's why ask is first, right? We want to ask them, hey, how do you think that went? Because what we know is if we want their buy-in, if we want their ownership for the outcome, they need to be invested in it. And we want to get their perspective. And also we'll learn a lot, right? You ask that question and you think, were we even in the same meeting, right? Do you have that self-awareness of what's going on? So asking that question, how do you think it went? What do you think about that? What was going on at that point? Great. What are you going to do about it now? All right. So we have the what, so what, now what? And if anytime I get struck, go back to those, hey, what happened? So what did you think about that? Now what are you going to do? And getting that dialogue going so they realize they have a stake in the game, I think is really valuable. And then you can say, oh, and I have some suggestions, or let's work through this, and how can I help you? But asking first is great. Actively listening, I think it's an underappreciated skill, and it is one that needs to be practiced and reinforced. We teach it in our sales training too, listening to our client, which is one of those things that can help reduce friction, right? It can help improve the way that our clients see us. But it's no more important than in coaching, where listening to what they're actually saying, leaning in. We teach the active listening techniques, right? Of, are you really focusing on their words? Are you paraphrasing? Are you seeking to understand what they're saying instead of just, responding? And can you repeat back or kind of understand that? So super important. And maybe the hardest is assuming best intentions, but this comes up in that mindset of, let's assume they're trying to do a good job and figure out what's getting in the way or what challenges they have, versus assuming they're lazy, they're incompetent, they don't know what they're doing, which if that's our perspective, it really changes, right, that conversation. But
it's both ways too. The reps need to assume best intentions from the managers that are trying to coach. That tends to be a challenge, especially with Gong and Chorus and some of that stuff. The reps that think they're performing at a high level, they're like, I don't do that. It's getting them to understand why.
Right. Yeah, and I think it starts with a dialogue. Having showing that you're invested in what you're trying to do. And Gong, I think Gong can be misused or can be challenging because, again, if you just give them the recordings and they're like, go fix it versus, hey, let's listen to this 5 minutes of the conversation, both of us, and then let's talk about that. What did you like about it and how did it go? That could be a great coaching, rewind the game tape and using that. But often I think it's just used as kind of a scorecard, right? So those are the 3 A's. It's kind of the Swiss Army knife, right? You can use it in a lot of different ways, but that's the basis. And when we think about that from a coaching and back to the how do you coach out of the slump, well, we need to figure out, well, where is their slump or maybe what's causing the slump? Take that coaching mindset and apply it. And when we think about coaching, and we'll define 2 different types, but one is opportunity or deal coaching. So my experience is most managers are pretty good at opportunity coaching because they grew up as reps. Never met a deal I didn't like. Roll up my sleeves. Let's get in there. Let's win the deal, right? But what you're teaching the rep to do is you're the super rep. So all they need to do is call and you're going to take over and tell them what to do, and they don't have to actually figure that out. Skills coaching is a much more strategic approach to say, well, let's diagnose what's getting in the way of call planning or what's getting in the way of your prospecting, and then work on a plan to address that so that we don't have to be back here fixing it every time. So we address, there are lots of different deal coaching, deal desks, things you can do there. But let's talk about the skill coaching. And I think it's important, and there are a lot of different ways to think about this, but there have been several conversations over the last day and a half about where is the customer in their purchase process and where are you in your sales process. So this is very generic intentionally, but thinking they're going through this from being initially open to making a decision. The seller's going through, call planning, developing needs, presenting that. We need to figure out where things are getting stuck along the way, right? And how can we help reduce friction or how can we help improve? So when you think about the selling skills at each of these stages, it gives us a way to think about where we're going to coach them. So let me pause there. Any general comments or thoughts on that? And I apologize for going so quickly because I know we're rushed and you guys probably have planes and other things to catch. So what I think is...
I'd love to hear from others. So where it falls apart for us, for our field managers, they're not going to be good at all of those things. They're going to be good at 6 or 4. And so they end up then building and reinforcing with a team those things that they're really good at, but the weaknesses are become weak across an entire team. So for an example, for us, we follow the Challenger sales methodology, and dialing up constructive tension is the most difficult thing for our sellers to do because they want to make everybody happy and not be comfortable.
Right.
And so for our, out of our 50 field managers, for the 8 that are good at constructive tension, their teams are good at it. But for the 30 or the 42 that aren't good at it, their teams aren't very good at it. So how do you all sort of diagnose that and then overcome that challenge, recognizing that people are going to coach to their strengths more often than not, out of kind of what you talked about? They don't know. They're young in their role or young in that piece. So
one of the things that we've I don't know if this is right or wrong, but I'll tell you what we're doing. One of the things that we've tried to do is create a culture of practice and to help people feel like they can be vulnerable. And so we have like a series of 5 different modules in our learning and development tool where they will listen to what is sometimes a best-in-class example and sometimes not. Score it with the permission of the rep. Like, we always ask for permission, so like nobody feels like somebody's sharing something that they did without them knowing. And people have been really excited when something is shared, whether it's good or not. We don't use horrible examples, but there's always ways you can make things better, right?
Yep.
And so they can submit examples, and then their supervisor will grade it. And my team will really look at where there are skill deficiencies, especially in that first year, where we want to get them to their first sale and hitting their ramp as quickly as possible. And like, okay, well, this one is really struggling with discovery. we're going to work them through this discovery model so that the sales leader, it's really easy and turnkey for them to work with their rep. There's probably a better and easier way, but that's kind of how we're blocking and tackling, so that if there's something that they're not necessarily comfortable with, they can just put the autopilot on and work with their seller.
Yeah, and I think it brings up an important point that you. Sorry, go ahead.
Coffee. Right. I was just going to say, I don't know if you ever do with your first-time leaders like a skill-will analysis. Like if you have 10 key steps or whatever they are, have them grade themselves from 1 to 10 and where they think they're the best. Because I think the will is really critical. Like what they want to do. Usually that's the most telling. Like the things that they don't really want to do are usually the things that they're not great at. And then I think that allows your VPs, it's kind of like their cheat code to be able to coach those first-time leaders. It's like, you said you were a 5 on a skill here and a 1 from a will. This is a big piece of our challenger sales methodology. Like we have to work on this, right? But it's hard for a VP to just like understand and diagnose that all the time. So that's something that we do once every 6 months with the first-line leaders.
It's practical. Thanks. Ryan.
Yeah, and lovely segue. Thank you, by the way. I think it's a great experience or opportunity to go through that exercise and get their input. And what I was going to say is the best coaches don't have to be the best player on the field, right? In fact, to the earlier comment, they're often not. So those who have performed at a high level sometimes struggle to help others do it, versus those who have studied the game and really understand the aspects are better off being able to execute on that. What you need to be able to do is diagnose and get help. But we use this very same form, right, this very same approach to say, go through this, and what we propose is the manager does it and have the rep self-diagnose. Now let's compare, where do we agree? Great, lean in on those. Where do we disagree? That's interesting. But instead of arguing about it, let's just call that an area to investigate. So on our next call, or why don't you show me some evidence? Let's make sure you understand what the expectation is. So it's a great opportunity then to have those conversations. And where they're doing well, let's celebrate those areas. Let's empower them. And so where we both agree that they're doing super well, maybe that becomes the person that can model it for somebody else. Or why don't you come in and show your call plan in the next team meeting, because that's fantastic. And so we can leverage them, right? So it gives us, when you do this for your whole team, now you have the basis to say, well, and everybody's struggling at negotiating. Maybe we should do a tune-up there, or we need to do something. But we do that exact same thing. Plot it. We have a matrix, so plot it, and you can kind of see how people break out and where we need to lean in on those skills. But again, let's take 2 or 3 of them then and develop that coaching plan as we go forward. So we don't have time to go through the whole day and a half program here, but I just wanted to kind of give a backdrop for, I think this is a really valuable tool, and happy to share and follow up, provide more of setting the foundation. We're talking about getting out of a sales slump. So where do they think they're struggling? Where do we think they're struggling? And let's make sure we develop a plan to get ahead of those skills, provide them the resources they need. And then, I think every 6 months is great, but let's revisit this, monthly in our one-on-one, see how we're doing, and then we can close that gap. So comments or thoughts on this?
I didn't know that was your next slide.
It was a good lead in. All right. So I think we have about 15 minutes. I'm happy to transition and talk a little bit about leveraging AI, if that would be valuable. Let me ask, how many teams are using ChatGPT, Copilot, kind of ingrained? And do you have a process for that? What does that look like?
Nope, it's ad hoc.
Okay, yeah.
So what we do is every time we train, we give tips and tricks. So we just put together a strategic business review playbook. How do you do a strategic business review with a client at every, sense of every stage of the business review process? And then we have, here's how to use ChatGPT to go faster, to move faster. Like that's part of, here's, like even think or Gong thank you note after you meet with them, things like that. Just reminding them of all the ways that you can shortcut the
It's
process.
like a big list that is, on an internal portal. That's like a cheat sheet.
It is. It's an actual document that says, okay, here's how you get the meeting for a strategic business review. Here's what you say when you're there. Here's the presentation and how you position. And strategic business reviews, like our approach is good things happen when you have strategic business reviews with your clients, right? And and so how can we encourage those to happen more, because they don't happen enough? So we really want to ingrain that in our culture.
So I think it's a great thing to get started on, and it doesn't take a heavy lift. I mean, there's so many tools, there's so much noise, right? It can get overwhelming. But are people just using it? Are they sharing best practices? And if, again, going back to, are they stuck somewhere? Well, there may be something very simple they can do in their call planning process, or the way they're preparing, using ChatGPT to role play or create objections and respond to objections. These are general ideas, but I think just thinking about the insights and the understanding of our client, which goes back to the buyer friction, right? The better we can understand their position, where they're headed, helping us be more efficient, right? So just being able to process and do more efficiency and effective, and improving messaging and communication. So I don't personally like ChatGPT to draft things from scratch for me, because I have my own writing stuff.
Clean it up, though.
But it's great at reviewing or giving a starting point, and then I love editing other people's work. So using it that way. But it can sure help you condense a whole bunch of information. Or I just took 10 pages of notes and I said, can you summarize with these categories and give you the output? And how long would that take? So I think in sales, we need to be thinking about, it's not just about creating that prospecting spam message, which it seems like people have figured out, because we're all getting more and more of those, right? But I think one of the most important areas is when we're doing our account planning, to dive into that next level. Somebody use a pest analysis in the business? If we have a minute, I'm actually going to show that. But pest is political, economic, social, technological, right? Kind of a business school concept. You say, hey, can you give me a pest analysis on this customer in their industry? I know more in 30 seconds than I would have done, trying to research that. I'll show you an example of that. But creating communications, presentations, obviously, even having, and again, there's security concerns we don't have time to get into today. So depending on how you're using it, if you're using the paid version and whatnot, but feeding a presentation in and say, hey, can you give me some feedback? Did I meet the requirements here? Is there anything you do? And I did that recently. I came back and said, well, you know what? You might build up your case studies around this particular industry, because that's important based on the notes that I fed it. So lots that you can do there. We've talked about Gong, but understanding what was said in those meetings, providing insights, conversational intelligence, that's going to change our world in the next couple of years. Where you can go not just back to a call recording, but go back to the whole body of knowledge and say, where does this rep get stuck? Mm-hmm. And, where do deals go to die? What happened there? Let's analyze what was going on there and pulling out that information. So, stay tuned there. Obviously on meeting planning, prep, objectives. We talked about simulation and role play.
Ray, I think it's almost more basic. I mean, for us, we have an extremely diverse sales team. And so just telling people, here's what the tool is, right? Here's what you can and can't put into it because of security concerns. Here's where we're expecting you to be able to leverage it. Here's the rules about you can cut and paste directly, or you have to retype it, right? I mean, for us, that was just step number one before we could get to any of this stuff. We needed 6 months of discussion, reinforcement, all of those things, just to get folks to either start to use it at all or use it in the most appropriate ways.
ChatGPT specifically.
We started with ChatGPT. Now we have Copilot layered on top of everything. So we're not a Salesforce, we're Microsoft Dynamics. So Copilot goes into emails, it goes into a CRM, it goes into all the Teams discussions.
What's the adoption? Are people using it, or is it just there?
it's not, for us, it's not an option. It's baked into it. So literally all they have to do is hit the Copilot for Sales button, and then it'll say, do you want to reword this? Do you want to?
And are people using it?
People are using it, but
5 minutes.
Okay.
at different levels of adoption, for sure. But I see that as some really advanced function. But for us, we had to go through, here's what it is.
So what are they using it for? Just help.
The majority of our team is using it for how do I write a more compelling response, right? So not the first emails, but because we're pretty prescriptive on, hey, let's just word it like this when you're reaching out to somebody the first time. But how do I write a more compelling response? And then a ton of research. So tell me about, prevalence of this disease state in this subset of individuals in this community. And it's amazing for that.
So it sounds like I would say, from our experience, you're ahead of the game on just doing that, right? Because they need the basics, right? What does a good prompt look like? And I would say ChatGPT should be a coach and conversation tool, not the shell answer man, right? Or Google. And people get frustrated. It's like, well, it didn't give me the right answer. It's like, well, you may not be asking the question. Or you may need to ask 3 questions and say, well, that's close, but can you help me? So you need to prompt, you need to engage it in this ongoing process. And then you need to make sure that what came out of it is reasonable and accurate and, something you want to put in front of the client. But just to that point, I won't go through all the details.
Because it's not always right.
No, it's not.
It is
not.
Frequently will give you bad data and information.
But I think to the point of, you can use it in a lot of different areas on your ideal client profile, understanding the buyer, all the way across here. I mentioned the pest analysis and call planning. So I think identifying specific areas, and I'm happy to provide these slides, how you're preparing and having that kind of playbook, right, that gives you ideas and suggestions of where to use it without having to buy a tool or a whole new platform. Right?
One more thing, if you get the paid version of ChatGPT, and we use Microsoft too, so we use both, you can create your own GPTs, which I do, and it's awesome, where I have like a sales process GPT, and I have our entire playbook downloaded into it, and I'll ask questions like, how should we think about this problem? So rather than having to go through our whole process, it'll tell me exactly how, based on our process that's specific to us, to deal with it, and it saves me personally a ton of time. Sometimes I worry, and I don't know what your thought is on this, but sometimes I worry about sellers using it. Like, they can get so caught up and tangled around the axle of technology that they don't sell. Like, they're so busy using all these fun tools that they get distracted.
Well, and what I was going to say is I think it goes back to our coaching conversation is it's even more important for the managers to be able to review that information, right, to provide the input. I will just do this very quickly and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. And I think Jock had sent a note saying we could go later, but I think
She just came by the door, that's why she said.
Oh, did she? Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
But to Karen's point on custom, anybody else using custom GPTs? So
Not
this
yet. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's so cool.
So this is a way within, and again, you have to pay the $20 a month, or your organization does, and Copilot has a similar. But so I've created this one called Sales Training Pro, right? But it allows you to define what you want this. So if you thought about engaging with ChatGPT, you need to give it information, right? Who you are, what are you looking for, what output do you want to see? Well, this is a way of doing that all in advance. So what I've done is I've defined this with instructions, right? And then I've even fed it our playbook, I fed it our personas, I fed it our ideal client. So I don't have to tell it that every time. So when I go to target a client, it knows, and it even knows our sales training methodology. So if I say, what are impact questions? It knows that's image, money, productivity, etc. So I'm just going to do a really quick demo and then we'll wrap up. Do you care if I use SharePoint as an example?
Not at all.
Okay. So here's my opening I love.
I wasn't familiar with the passage analysis. I just didn't know the money. Right.
Well, transmission is interesting.
Yeah, if you're trying to build a value proposition for how to position yourself within our organization, there's key nuggets in there. Yeah,
So, and again, I haven't
you're already in.
preloaded this, right? But, and you can tell me whether this is accurate, but, my guess is it's reasonably accurate.
It's 100%
right?
accurate. Yeah.
What I'd love to do, though, is, and I have these kind of pre-done prompts, right, is to just engage it then in that dialogue. So, are there news or press releases I should be aware of? Now, it knows that I'm talking about, to your point, right? So now it's going to say, oh, well, we're recently doing, you got $550 million securitization. Now, we need to go back and verify this, right?
It's the two most current things that we just last month, or 2 months ago.
Okay, so
Yeah.
that's accurate. Okay,
Yeah.
and I'll just do one more here. So this one, because I mentioned it before, and then I'll wrap here. But I don't know that much about TierPoint. Should. But if I say, can I get a pest analysis, political, economic, social?
Yeah.
So now I understand a little bit about regulatory, sustainability, economic factors. So if I'm putting a backpack together or preparing, and I want to be closer to that client, I want them to understand that we get them, that I can speak their language to some extent, at least it's giving me a really good starting point. And I think we should be, doing that in our call planning and coaching our reps to do that. And if they're stuck, hey, is this a way that they can become, more smarter about their clients and better prepared?